evening and welcome. This is Frank On Camnet. Wherever you are across the globe, welcome to you, the Zambians. Congratulations for the decision that you made on the 12th of August. Above all, we must celebrate God's decision because, like I say, you did the very best. Do your very best, and God will do the rest. The government is in place, and already a number of governance pronouncements have been made. ActionAid Zambia has outlined some of the pertinent issues that it feels the new government should attend to, and will belabor on some of these in today's program, where I'm featuring ActionAid Country Director NALUCHA ZIBA, who is my guest, this evening. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening.
Have you recovered from the changes? I mean, it happened so fast, caught a number of people off guard. Have you recovered? Did you expect this?
Well, speaking as ActionAid Zambia, what we saw, we had anticipated it. We had anticipated the loss that the Patriotic Front-led party suffered, largely due to a number of factors. One, Zambia is highly a youthful population, and as an institution, we mainly work with young people across a diverse range of developmental issues.
Right.
And one of the issues that has been systematically coming out from the young Zambians is that there are no opportunities, be it economic, be it political, be it social. So a number of young Zambians are quite hungry to be involved in the running of the affairs of this country at various levels. However, the opportunities are very limited, and a lot of them are interested in being entrepreneurs. However, when you look at the banking services being offered in this country, currently there is no bank which will give a startup in terms of access to finance to a fresh graduate if you go there with your proposal and so forth. So these have been some of the issues that have been frustrating the younger generation. As you know that the world now is running based on a knowledge-based economy. And a lot of them are doing all they could to try and enhance their skills, be it education, the technical know-how, and so forth. And most of them are actually not even interested in the full-time civil service jobs, but they want to see opportunities that they are given to run their own businesses and employ their own young people. But those opportunities are just not there. So coupled with the high number of first-time voters and the youthful population, the elections delivered what it's delivered, and that's what we also saw in 2011 when the PF government was ushered in. It was largely ushered in by first-time voters, a bulk of young first-time voters. This election, with the registration of voters, we saw about close to 2 million new first voters being brought onto this register, and that itself meant a lot. And for any political party, it is always good to read also the demographic dividends of the country and the situation you're dealing with. Despite efforts to try and frustrate the voter registration and the young people, they still withered and decided to withstand all those things.
Tell me, NALUCHA, you've made it very clear, those who could take time to read the situation, to look at the economic and social issues would definitely agree with you. But where was the confidence of PF, coming from in all this?
Well, the tragedy of the Patriotic Front was, I would refer it to the emperor's new clothes. The analog in the emperor's new clothes. Once you run a country and you manage to silence divergent views, even as a leader, that makes the end. It makes the end of your downfall. We saw that divergent views were not being tolerated. We saw the media, even the public, especially the public broadcaster, they are all singing praises of the party in government, and there was no room to show the weaknesses. Therefore, what they were seeing was a force-made reality, and they enjoyed living in that reality. And a number of us prayed that they'll snap out of it as they get into the election. But what we saw is that it increased. Even us as civil society, we are also to blame, because we also saw a number of civil society also championing and applauding what they were doing. For instance, when the Cybersecurity Act was passed, we saw a number of civil society rushing to ZNBC, even welcoming it, saying us from this particular movement, we welcome this act, without really clearly advising the government on some of the ills of some of the things that they were bringing on the table and how poisonous the chalice they were drinking from was. So for us, those were some of the issues that we saw. So there wasn't really a true reflection on their part, because we saw a lot of attention seekers, job seekers, hungry Zambians, going there to tell them what they wanted to hear. And on top of that, what worsened the situation was their reliance on opinion polls, which was also worrying, because we saw MMD towards their end. There were also the opinion polls which were done pitting RB to be winning with certain margins, and the election delivered the opposite. And we hope that we were hoping that Zambians have learned to say opinion polls in Zambia do not matter. They have never decided an election. So we are hoping that these are some of the lessons that the UPND will be able to learn from successive political parties that have been government. The sad reality is that they all tend to play the same kind of script. The PF script, we saw it with the later days of the MMD. Then it comes out to replay itself. That is what was so saddening and sickening in the last days of the PF. But we hope that they will reorganize themselves, introspect, because we still need a strong opposition so that it's able to provide credible checks and balances to the UPND as they form government. We saw them doing that when they were in the opposition. They managed to do so for the last 20 years or so, and we are hoping that the PF won't go into oblivion. They will try to maintain their numbers in parliament, and we won't see a lot of crossing over, but also we'll see them trying to increase their numbers. Should there be by-elections in the coming years before we get to 2026, and them also trying to increase their numbers so that we still need a strong opposition at the end of the day.
Talk about political parties. You know, UPND was the major opponent in this election, but they did not punch holes in the manifesto of UPND. Instead, HH was made an easy target. A miscalculation that worked for HH?
Well, it's a miscalculation that worked for HH, and one of the things that we need to realize, politicians need to realize, is that Zambians are very sympathetic people. And what was shocking was how quickly that former president ECO forgot about that. Because even ECO, what made him popular was the so much seemingly antagonistic, which was being seen from the outside with the passing on of President Michael Sata between him and the then Vice President Guy Scott. So that narrative is the narrative which made ECO very popular, the humble and so on, and that's what ushered him into presidency. And then to go and repeat the same antagonistic way of doing politics on HH also did not work well for the Patriotic Front government. And we saw that as opposed to having issue-based campaigns, what we had were individual-based campaigns. So we saw virtual rallies which were solely mobilized and focused on an individual, as opposed to what UPND had said they were coming to deliver once they formed government. We saw that replay as well in the MMD PF when Michael Sata was coming on as presidency. There were all those stand-up comedies. A lot of people were mobilized to say all sorts of things about the late President Michael Sata, but that did not work. At the end of the day, what emerged was more of a protest vote. Even this one, it was more of a protest vote, I must say.
One of the major successes, depending on how you look at it, was the infrastructure in a program. Why didn't it play? And I think that is one major aspect of their campaign strategy to market the infrastructure and success. Why did this not play?
Well, one of the things that PF did very well, and they need to be applauded for, was the infrastructure drive. That one they did deliver. However, it was marred with corruption. There was a lot of seemingly allegation around the delivery of the infrastructure development, and the whole issue of trying to be so much focused on infrastructure development was because of the allegedly so many kickbacks that a number of politically exposed entrepreneurs as well as contractors, and politicians were being allegedly undertaking. So you find that it was being done on a cost of inflated costs. So we saw costs which were very high on average compared to regional costs we are seeing in other countries such as Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, in terms of delivering the same type of infrastructure. So the drive really, as much as it was a national agenda drive, but there was also accrued personal individuals at the back of the people who are driving that infrastructure. One best example I can give is the Ali Kinkata flyover bridge. We saw contradictory statements coming from a permanent secretary and a then minister, all in the same ministry over one infrastructure. So already that kind of mixed signaling was what was causing a lot of uneasiness and apprehension in a number of Zambians. And then we also saw how the Engineering Institute also said this bridge is not fit. It needs to be brought down. And questions were around to do with authorization of the entire procurement system. How were the contracts reviewed? How was the entire tendering and procurement done? And the quality of supervision of the work. What was happening around that? So it was leaving a lot of question marks on a lot of Zambians. And you know, a lot of Zambians are highly educated and they know these things. So for me, those were some of the missed opportunities that the Patriotic Front, and at some point they seemed to be very immune to scandals, like they just didn't care. Before you are even wrapping your head from one scandal, another one would have has emerged.
It became a norm.
It became a norm. So for them, it was not something strange. Rather, so that's what made a lot of Zambians quite uncomfortable.
Now let's look at the rural areas. You know, where PF has the rural areas is perhaps the strongest, base. Your organization, you personally, have traveled across the country, spent a lot of time in the rural areas. What were the people saying there? But I say PF was very confident that they were going to retain, that base. But come election to the country, what were you picking up, when you are in these, areas, in the rural areas?
Well, the major issues in the rural areas was the issue to do with hunger. Yeah. Especially if you are more in the western, southern belts, largely because I think those provinces had suffered successive droughts. And the food crop production has become very low over time. And then the management of the entire disaster management response itself was a disaster, which was not even following the laid down act in terms of composition of committees, assessments, and really channeling out food resources to the poor. Then when you go to areas which had sustainably good rainfall patterns and so on, if you look at Eastern Province, it's largely a farming base. So for them, it's about agriculture. But their major complaint was that the PF had killed the farmer. That was the slogan which was there in the entire Eastern Province. It was Paya Farmer. That's that. Then you mean they will be making reference to the PF. And when you try to interrogate further, how did they arrive at that? They will tell you, look, before PF came into power, during MMD time, I was able to grow 1,000 bags of maize, and I'll be able to sell close to 500 of them in Malawi, and the rest I would be able to sell in Zambia and keep some for food. But over time, I'm only able to grow 300 and only get 300 to 250 bags. Even these 250 bags, if I tried to sell even 70 of these bags in Malawi, I'll be apprehended, my maize will be grabbed, I don't know where it's taken, and it's total losses. They will even bring on top of that ZNS to whip you when they find you on your bicycles or so on, trying to cross over and sell their produce to Malawi. And yet at the end of the day, you are saying you are running a liberal economy and a market-driven economy. So you will see that there was all these policy inconsistency even around the agriculture sector, which was not so much welcome, as agriculture became equivalent to the Farmer Input Support Program, which was also mad with its own issues around the the so-called fertilizer supply, sale. Government was importing fertilizer at a very high prices, inflated prices, which were ending. There were all sorts of allegations around the whole chain of supply of fertilizer and so forth. Matrices were being drawn and so forth, and people were reading them. So that whole thing compounded together led to a lot of uncertainty in a lot of people. You go to Northwestern Province, very rich resource province, they would ask you to say, on average, we are seeing copper trucks, gold trucks moving out of our province. Where does that gold go? May we know what is our total contribution to the Central Treasury as a province, and what comes back to us as a province. And the other issue is that they were very clear. They said, look, we don't see ourselves representative in this government. This government, in terms of its composition, it's just about 3 provinces. So what does it mean? They will be coming to extract minerals there, here, going to develop elsewhere, and then governing us. Are we slaves? So there were all these issues which, for me, were quite... the government then, the party in government then, needed to sit down and address them in a very mature and holistic manner, as opposed to being very antagonistic and trying to divide the country further on regional lines. It was just not working.
As a rider, to that, this economy, this election should have been driven, by the economy. That, to me, should have been the issue. But unfortunately, this campaign was bereft of economic issues. You just made reference to tribal sentiments. PF brought back GBM and Kambwili, and their language was basically tribal. We had a president who stood on the podium and he said, I am going to hand these instruments back to me, and I'm going to arrest HH immediately. I win. What was going through your mind? What was your response when you're hearing this type of thing? When you're hearing a president actually very confident, even telling us the number of the votes he was going to win with, 500,000. He was going to hand over the instruments to himself. He was going to arrest, HH, a man he detained for 16 times. What is going through your mind? I mean, as a governance advocate, as an electorate, as a voter, as a Zambian?
Frank, for me, I took it was, he was playing politics, trying to show confidence in his followers that he had everything in control. And that was coupled with the same assessments we saw around elections, which were pitching them to win by 60%. And which were really not anchored on any strong research, because research has to be rigor. And when you paid attention to analyze how those researches were conducted, it was really interesting, and it brought out a lot of conversations. However, as a country, we need to move away from individualistic type of politics, which pride itself on tribalism and hate. As at the end of the day, we need to have a moment when this country needs to heal. And I believe that people enter politics for the purpose of serving this country. And therefore, when you want to serve this country, first thing is you should never look at somebody's tribe, somebody's religious affiliation, whether somebody is tall, is short, is light, is dark. At the end of the day, when you're a leader, it's everyone under you. You have to make sure that everyone, whether they like you or not, they are able to benefit, and you are able to pay attention to their peculiar needs. And for me, just that sense is what seemingly to have been missing in our former president. And also, unfortunately, the people that surrounded him, even his cabinet, I know there's collective decision and collective management. However, there are times the leader you get is a reflection of the people around him. So what we saw was also a collective reflection of whoever was in cabinet at that time. And I usually hear people say, no, but so-and-so was much better, so-and-so. I said, look, there's nothing like that. If you don't agree, usually, the best is you resign so that you maintain your clean sheet and your clean score. I hope that we'll be able to reach that level of politics in Zambia. And this should also be a lesson to President Hakainde Hichilema. Once he surrounds himself with a room of people who all agree to him, he should be worried. Because he needs to surround himself with a room of people who don't agree with them, and he's trying to convince them. But at the end of the day, what they should agree on is having the same vision and mission for this country. That one should never change. It's about Zambia first.
You say he was playing politics, but I'm sure partly he was not. Why do I say this? He had detained HH for 16 times. He could have, arrested him. What do you say about the character of this president? Should we conclude that we had created a monster, he had become a dictator, or is the system we have right now, capable of creating a dictator?
For me, it's both of those factors. First, we need to acknowledge that the current Zambia needs a systems change.
Yeah.
The current system we continue to operate on and take pride in is what was created by our colonial masters. And that system was meant to keep, it was a racial system which was meant to keep the blacks out for the purposes of them managing the economic affairs of this country. And to do that, they had the Public Order Act, they had all sorts of these laws. And what just changed upon independency was the oppressor. So it changed now to us to start oppressing our fellow Zambians. And you see that oppression now starts changing to tribes. At times it even moves to age, at times it moves to religion. So it's about who's there. So it's the whole systems change that we need to change. The current system is not fit for purpose. It's very capable of creating a dictator. Because if you look at even, for me, my fear is that the PF were so much, they were so much happy with putting upon laws, and that's whether they thought they'll never get out of power. And that was so worrying. And they didn't care in terms of how bad those laws were. As much as we like to preach to say, let us have good governance, it should not just be every other law. It should be good laws at the end of the day. And we saw a whole lot of bad laws which were enacted. And believe you me, the status quo is that this government might maintain them and tell you that we did not create them. We found them, and start using them on the citizens. And those are some of our biggest fears for us as governance experts in this country. Therefore, there is need to review the whole system. Let's reduce the powers of the executive. Because we saw with the previous government how the executive was able to bully the other wings of government. One of the most important thing to note is that even this election, it was the people of Zambia stopping a third term attempt at presidency. It was a protest vote. Why do I say so? We saw the creation of Buten, which was pushed into parliament, and none of his cabinet could actually had the capacity to stand up and say this is wrong. But you now keep hearing them now that they're out to say he wasn't a good candidate, we saw he has made us lose. But you had the opportunity to do those things when you were cabinet minister, so what did you do? That is the question. We saw Buten being pushed into parliament, and likely it fell. So from the legislature point of view, they did their part. But then you get to the judiciary, the whole issue again was tried to push through the courts of system, and the courts handed them a blank check of saying, no, it was never. I mean, even when you're interpreting a constitution, there are rules to interpretation of the law. Why didn't they start with a literal rule? For me, that has been my biggest question to the Constitutional Court judges. And you never get seemingly to get an answer. Whether it was bullying, whether it was intimidation, nobody knows. But hopefully time will tell. So the system is capable of producing a dictator. And we need to be very careful. Even President Hichilema ought to be very careful. Because of the so much power that visited in the presidency, he needs to be very responsible in terms of how he uses those power. Because at the end of the day, that's what moves you either from being a good president to a dictator. We saw, for instance, we had President Mwanawasa. Everybody's still clapping. A number will tell you to say, by far the best president Zambia has ever. Even me, that has always been my considered opinion. By far the best president Zambia has ever had, though his only failures was around constitutional making. So it's very capable that this system can still replicate another Edgar Lungu. It's very capable because it's a whole system. You fire, you appoint, you have all that power. So we need to see tenure of security, even in the judiciary, most of all these constitutional office holders, so that they are able to execute their duties without intimidation, without being bullied, without being thinking to say, probably I'm crossing the party in government, what it wants. Because at the end of the day, it's about what does our constitution say, what is best for the Zambian people. So when you go to serve, that should always be at the back of your mind.
If a lawyer can manipulate the Constitution, then surely there must be something wrong, in the Constitution. What should be done that what happened, does not repeat itself? We saw it with Chiluba. It fell, fortunately. Edgar took it to the Congo, and he got his way through. I don't know whether it's because of the people he appointed. I don't know. Maybe we'll never know. But what should be done to have a watertight constitution that is not easily manipulated?
Well, Zambia has a fairly good constitution.
Yeah.
It's just that it's very bulky and very talkative. It has a combination of principles you need in the constitution as well as policy issues. So the better we removed the policy issues and moved them back to where they belong, will be better as a country, because our constitution it's very long for nothing. I mean, look at the US Constitution. Very short, to the point, and precise. But our constitution is very talkative. It's all over. Even the election date it gives you. So when you have a crisis, what happens? So those are some of the areas where it needs a bit of cleaning. And also one of the things we have to realize is that power has always belonged to the people. Even as you are making a constitution, always remember that power belongs to the people. They always remain as the owners of the constitution. So therefore, how you protect that is that what we saw with the former president, it was a total regard for the constitution. The problem was not with the constitution, but it was with the person. So I think we need to distinguish that, and that's also what we saw with Chiluba. But likely the same document managed to put a stop to Chiluba's third term. For this other third term which was being imposed, the constitution was very clear, but personally I'm of the view that it was misinterpreted by the Constitutional Court for whatever benefits, and therefore the people put a stop to it. So the people, as put in the Constitution, I think it's Article 2, to say every person has a right to defend this Constitution. They did that on the 12th of August. So we should always remember that at the end of the day, the final decider will always be the Zambian people, and for that I applaud the Zambian people, and they should maintain it like that. Even with this party which has come in government, the UPND, it should never think that it will be bigger than Zambia, because at the end of the day, Zambia will always be bigger than any one of us.
Absolutely. Before I talk about how well or how badly the ECZ managed the whole process, NALUCHA, but quickly set aside, put away, the former, president. You were concerned about the numbers of members of parliament in the House. You're praying that PF continues to be a strong opposition. Fortunately, PF won quite a sizable number of seats. Was this election targeted at removing Edgar, based on the numbers they now have in parliament, which is sizable, or it was both? To get rid of PF and to get rid of Edgar?
For me, it was both. And also one of the things that we need to realize is that Zambia's democracy is maturing. In the past, people would vote from the presidents to the last person, member of parliament, whether it's a mayor or council chairperson, the councillor, you all vote for one party. But nowadays, we are moving slowly. There's a shift. people are moving slowly to an area where they are able to decide to say who's the leader. So what these parties have offered us, if UPND has given me a presidential leadership, I'll go for them for presidents. If PF have given me a mayoral candidate I believe I'm comfortable with, have the leadership skills, I'll go for that. If the councillor is from NAREP or another party or PNP and so on, and I believe they have the leadership, I'll go for that. And that is the patterns that we are continuing to witness in Zambia. And it's good for the maturity of our democracy. And a lot of Zambians should be encouraged to continue on that path. One of the most interesting constituencies has been NALUCHA, which has produced that. Presidential vote went to President Hakainde Hichilema. Member of Parliament went to the PF candidate. You go to council chairperson. So it shows you that the people who were voting there knew what they were doing. So we really need to have a balance. We need to have we don't need to have a parliament that is purely dominated by one party. Then it defeats the whole democracy that Zambian wanted when they removed the UNIP government and changed the constitution in 1991 to usher in democracy. What we need to see is a fairly balanced parliament that is able to lead and give the confidence in this country. And what is just worrying is the increased number of petitions, which we have seen. And it's saddening to see that UPND has started to walk the same walk that PF
it's unfortunate because
did in
we'll end up with
2011.
the majority, which really we don't want.
Which we don't want, exactly.
And wasting money.
And wasting money. So those are some of the issues we keep saying politicians need to learn. They should have learned that from the PF 2011. They decided to petition everywhere they lost, but did it give them an upper hand in terms of lawmaking and other things? They still failed to garner butane. So those are some of the lessons I believe that the UPND could have learned from the successive party in governments. As much as we understand that electoral dispute is one of the provided for mechanism for election dispute management, but can we be a bit clearer? Because some of the petitions I'm seeing, I find them to be a bit odd. You lost by over 30,000 votes, and what are you petitioning? So sometimes let us just learn to get back to the drawing table and say I can still do better. 2026 is just 4 years from now.
Absolutely. Again, before we talk about ECZ, let's talk about HH's performance. Amazing. Across the country, is wearing national colors. This puts to bed the regional, issues, status we've been talking about. Again, you must be very encouraged about this, that we have a president now really who is wearing national colors.
Yes, we have a president who's wearing national colors, but that will only translate based on how he performs, how he shares the national cake equitably. One of the most disappointing things with the Patriotic Front then was that you'd hear sentiments coming out from the highest offices saying the challenge with Western and Southern provinces that you do not vote for PF, so we can't come and deliver development. But when you're collecting taxes, where were you going to collect from there? So people need to realize that leadership is never about a particular region where you come from. Once you decide to offer yourself for political office, it's for everyone. It's for the benefit of each and every Zambian. And I think that's what this election demonstrated. And I believe and hope that President Hakainde Hichilema will always keep that in mind, to say he's a national president. You saw red being dotted almost everywhere in all the corners of this country. Therefore, he's a president for all Zambians, even those who did not vote for him. He needs to embrace them. He needs to find a way of working with them. And working with them, we do not mean that you have to start now offering jobs to each and everyone. We like the stance he has said. It will be about you first being Zambian and being competent. So let competent people run the show, because at the end of the day, when Zambia prospers, we all benefit. Like right now, the exchange rate it seems to be stabilizing. And you've seen that almost everyone is enjoying. People are now saying, I need to start going back to China to order goods, to order what. That's what you want to see. Everybody having something to do in an economy. That, other than having an economy that only responds to a few, then there you are missing it. So we hope that he will truly embrace the vote that the Zambian people gave him and the confidence, and reciprocate the same even as he takes on the leadership mantle.
Before we take a break, ECZ. how did they perform? A very thankless job, I must say. It's because it's so difficult. I mean, you can easily be forced to take sides and side with the government of the day to play safe, to keep your job. At the end of the day, a lot of people are saying they came out with flying colors, or is it because the government of the day is out of the government?
Well, the performance of ECZ on a scale of out of 10, I would give them 4.
Okay.
And reason being that elections are not just about what happens on the actual day of voting. Election is a process.
Yeah.
So one of the things, for me, the biggest issue I had with ECZ was one, the voter registration. It was very poorly managed.
Yeah.
It was managed in a very partisan line, which was totally unprofessional and uncalled for.
And people could be defranchised.
Exactly.
If they didn't decide to vote across the board.
Across the board, yeah. But the people who are still defranchised. We have a lot of young people who never managed to register.
Yeah.
I mean, I come from Nalolo. Yeah. Nalolo has certain parts of Nalolo where there's no network, and there was no voter registration. Gosh. Came back, delivered the message. Yeah. Clearly, it was not in their interest. They didn't want to do that. Secondly, there were consultative meetings which were being called off, and we saw some civil society being, frankly, the language, the conduct being told off and all those things, and then they decided to create consultations on whom they consider to be civil society and who wouldn't be considered. So you can't be divisive when you are a government entity, because at the end of the day you need to realize that you are a servant of the people, so you have to save according to the mandates and what has been placed on you. So all those were runner-up to the elections. Then we saw a lot of spoiled votes in this election. It's clearly pointing to weaker voter sensitization. And the law is very clear. Voter registration will be going on. Even tomorrow it needs to start, as far as I'm concerned. Going by the law, you don't have to wait for 2026. Because that is why you are constituted and mandated. Then you're also supposed to be creating awareness so that citizens know how to vote. We had a lot of first-time voters. I was a roving observer in this election. I remember when I went to vote at my polling station in Chongwe, and when I arrived there, because I was still wearing my whole uniform and all those written election observer, this woman pulls me in a Chteng. And she was saying she had been going from one stream to the other trying to vote, but it was arranged alphabetically. And she couldn't read. Yeah. So we had to help her read, find her name, then take her to the stream. And when I asked her, what time did you get here? She was there by like 5. And that was almost close to 3 in the afternoon. So for me, these are some of the areas that we need to improve on. Then also, I observed in the male prison, some of the prisoners were coming out and asking to say, what is going on here? They didn't know that it was elections and people were voting. And then we had this whole judgment on allowing prisoners to vote, which is very progressive from a human rights perspective. But measures, we needed to put in place adequate measures. For instance, Uganda had the same ruling in the courts. With their last elections, they did not go ahead and start voting. They said there were a whole lot of mechanisms they needed to put in place. But with ECZ, they said, no, we are ready. But we saw the implication and repercussions of that. And in some instances, there was even no braille for the visually impaired and others. It was there in some instances it was not there. So even them, they felt differentiated in those aspects. So there were a whole lot of issues around the electoral management, and yet we knew that this election was coming. Like now we know that the election is coming in 2026, so we have got no excuse to say due to the larger voter turnout, we are quite ill-equipped with staff and so on. If anything, in planning, you plan for both eventualities. Whether you have got more voter turnout, you have got low voter turnout, you have to work with both scenarios. So for me, those were some of the issues which we noted, as well as management of results. You vote and over 24 hours you don't see any announcement. I think it brings anxiety. It brings anxiety, and it was its first in the Zambian election for us to see such a thing. As much as they gave themselves a 72-hour and managed to announce within the 72 hours, but at the beginning they created a whole lot of unnecessary anxiety. Time management was pathetic. They kept saying we announced results at 11, they were only to show up maybe at 23 hours or at 01 and so on. And keeping the entire country at ransom as if we are children or they are children. For me, those were some of the areas which we have seen themselves repeatedly happening with each successive electoral commission of Zambia, and we are hoping that they are building lessons and working on them, but we see them more especially around result management. We continue seeing them happening. And also the use of COVID guidelines, in a way for me it raised a lot of gray areas, because in some ways it was not even agreeing to the SADC framework on elections. So those for me were some of the gray areas which I saw, but all in all, under the circumstances, they tried to deliver an election at the end of the day.
I keep on delaying the break. We're definitely breaking after this other question, which I've just remembered. I want to close the election part so that we can pick it up, from the inauguration. The two running mates, the female running mates. I want you to talk about that. What did they bring, to the election, or if anything, or why didn't they bring as part of the equation? And then your thoughts on the participation of women. Did we see more numbers? Did we see something that tells you're very strong about gender issues, that yes, we haven't been doing well, but perhaps from now onwards, this gives us encouragement to move to another level? That's basically the general picture of the women, and then also now the focus on these two running mates. And also maybe Chishala also was running a party. Just spend about 2-3 minutes before we go on the break on this gender issue.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Frank. We saw a high number of female running mates in this election, which was quite impressive. And kudos to be given to the gender agenda and the women's movement. Women brought a whole lot to the table. For instance, over 50% of the registered voters were women. And we saw that it gives assurance to say that we are getting comfortable in Zambia now at even having women as vice president. But the whole patriarchy, we seem not to be ready for a female president. Why do I say so? Because if we were, we could have seen probably maybe Chishala Kateka, but also she came on the scene quite late. That was my view, but we are hoping to see her sustain the momentum through to 2026. In terms of having women as candidates across other various levels, in terms of parliamentary nominations, there were very low numbers of women who were nominated, largely because due to issues of allegations around corruption, as we heard from both the now party in government and the party which has gone out, because there were two most attractive parties where a lot of people wanted to stand. But there were all sorts of allegations around corruption around their whole adoption process, which did not make it very easy for women to be adopted. And I think this election, when it comes to gender, I think it has been one of the worst, because the numbers of women have gone down. I think currently we have close to, is it 12 to 13% in parliament? So we have got very low numbers of women, quite below the SADC and in the region. It's a worrying, and we are hoping that with the 8 nominations that the president has, he might be able to use them for women, but younger women, because the vote came from the younger people, and the bulk of the registered voters were women, but younger women. So that, and the reason why I'm emphasizing on the younger is because youths in this country have never been given opportunity. It's always about experience. So we even saw the whole discourse starting with the appointment of his press aide to say he's young, he's not experienced, and so on. But where is the experience going to come from?
When does
exactly. Even HH is getting his presidential experience now.
Edgar didn't have experience.
Even Edgar, yes, he didn't have experience. So those are some of the issues that we need to start learning to deal with as a country, and begin to look at how do we put in mentorship, coaching, and leadership for these young people as they take up these public office and spaces. But on the gender agenda, there's a whole need of reintrospection that needs to happen in terms of how do we get back and reclaim a women's movement that is not partisan, that does not align itself to one party, but that works to serve the interests of women regardless of the political affiliation. So for me, those were some of the lessons coming out of this election, and we are quite hopeful that a lot of issues will be dealt with, and hoping for 2026, as well as by-elections, which we'll be having in case there will be by-elections between now and 2026, that we can get political parties to feed in women, and also whether we will have women who will be willing to give themselves up for political office. As for most women, they don't run because the whole number of issues. The bullying is very rife in this country. There's a whole issue of financial resources, and there's a whole issue to do with just your own personal confidence and your whole issues. So we are hoping that these are some of the areas that that will be addressed moving forward. Yeah.
I know my director is worrying when we're going to break. Just one before we break. Then we can do the 15-20 minutes. Just 15 after. After that, I just want to close this election, and then start on inauguration very quickly. 16 presidential candidates. Some of them really insignificant in terms of performance. 2 reference questions to that. Time for some of them to go home and sleep and do something else? Is it time now to relook at the Constitution, perhaps put a cap there and say maybe 3, 4 maximum political parties?
Well, like I said earlier, I think we don't need to have a talkative constitution. Some of these issues can be handled through policy and other legislation, like the electoral legislation. If we want to reduce the number of, we had how many, 16 presidential, and making the whole ballot quite longer. And it is interesting to note that 98% of the votes were shared between PF and UPND and presidential. And the rest, the less than, is it 7% or so, is what went to these other presidential candidates. So that validates your concern. But however, we need to also mention that our constitution is very clear. It provides for freedom of association, so it doesn't allow for limiting one. It's largely, they were practicing their democratic right to stand and be chosen for election. So within that same breadth of the constitution, it allows for that.
Absolutely.
So we are a democratic country, so we should be ready. I mean, some countries, I mean, India, okay, because of also the size, sometimes they tend to have over even close to 100. However, the votes went to the 2 parties. 98%, over 90% of the votes were between presidential, between PF and UPND. So that tells you that there's still a whole lot of work that the other parties need to do. But also, if you look at where UPND started from and where PF started off, they also started off from very small and eventually grew. So it's also maybe to give them time. They will grow over time into also formidable opposition.
You have to sell to us now. We're the boss. You know, we're the ones who vote. This is Frank on Camnet. We're going on break, and then we'll spend 15 minutes, just to look at the inauguration. What was, said? What is ActionAid response to some of the issues that have been covered? We'll tabulate and move systematically, look at some of the issues that the president-elect addressed. The president now has, addressed, and the reaction from ActionAid and the Zambian people at large. This is Frank on Camnet. My guest, NALUCHA ZIBA, who is a country director for ActionAid. Join us very shortly.
Africa is rising to a new dawn of integrity and accountability. Are you tired of being swindled or buying fake or illegal properties? Would you like to sell or buy genuine property? Would you like to list your property on both local and international market? Don't waste your time. Call the professionals, the SGK Properties, on +260 762 166 018. SGK Properties. Your business assurance is our priority.
The Camnet October Conference is fast approaching. To participate in the forthcoming conference, you're required to book your seat by paying 750 kwacha per person per day. Date 1st and 2nd October 2021. Venue, the Healing Word Ministries International in Ibex Hill. Guest speakers include Professor Reda, Professor Munkumba, Mr. Nkuruma Kalaluka, Dr. Musonda, Dr. Sitima, Anthony from USA, Dr. Mwale, Honorable Bob Sichinga, Elias Bondela, and your hosts, Pastors Victoria and Moses Chiluba.
The deadline for payments will be 28th September 2021. Any late payment made after 28th September will attract a penalty fee of 200 kwacha per person.
Make your payments through mobile money for MTN 096 296 5883, for Airtel 097 975 3010. Our banking details are 913 000 182 5325. Stanbic Bank, Kablonga branch.
This is Frank on Camnet. We'll spend the next 15 minutes focusing on the inauguration and related, pronouncements on that day. And, since, then, before we do that, NALUCHA, just the picture of the inauguration, extremely well, attended, very colorful. The sun was out, the sky was blue. Almost everybody there was represented, except the doves were not available this time because the last time they couldn't fly off. I'm told they wanted to be paid, to be part of the ceremony. That's why HH used the balloons. But seriously, your thoughts about the inauguration?
Well, my thoughts are around the inauguration. I happened to attend it, and I had found it to be a bit chaotic, especially even if you had a VIP card trying to enter. We saw even the members of the diplomatic corps failing, and it could have been handled better. Yeah, it could have been handled better, and it was a bit chaotic, but. Well, I think they did what they did, but at the end of the day, it was a bit chaotic. Yeah. It's just that it had the goodwill. People were excited. They were in high spirits. They came dressed and so on. But if you looked at it from a number of things, where it was a bit also below par.
Absolutely. I received my card at night, and then getting in there, I used all sorts of pathways.
Well, cards were being delivered as late as 03 hours, so that's why I'm saying it was a bit chaotic. So who gets an invitation at 3 for an event in the morning? So largely I've decided you are not going, and then even just the whole traffic management and so it was just something else.
Right.
Yeah, it was just something else.
Okay, I want us to move a little bit systematically, and look at the issues. Your response to a number of things the president had, said, and I want you, after that, you move systematically about some of the issues that Action Aid has, raised. For example, the economy is really in ICU. The debt situation. Where does H8 start from? Poverty, 50% living under poverty line. Corruption. The freezing of Finley's account and how DEC has responded, so far, and SEC. The civic space and rule of law, which PF narrowed. Let's move systematically. The other issues I have left out, but you raised a number of these. Please run them through and how you'd like, this new administration address these pertinent issues.
Thank you, Ambassador Frank. I will start with the whole issue of corruption. As Action Aid Zambia, we take recognition that the President indicated his commitment to prudent and effective utilization of public resources in his inaugural speech. And as such, the new government should have we have the view that the new government should have a two-pronged approach in the fight against corruption. Firstly, we should strengthen the institutional and technical capacity of the law enforcement agencies to do their work and ensure that evidence is available. Secondly, we are of the view that the government should press a premium on corruption prevention by undertaking reforms to seal all loopholes both in public and private sector which have been exploited by corrupt persons. This will entail a detailed systems audit as well as organizational assessment. Further, the legal reform will be necessary to strengthen and domesticate all anti-corruption laws, as well as in line with the international as well as the regional conventions that the country is party to. So we believe that with such an approach, it will be able to give back the confidence in the institutions mandated to deal with issues of corruption in this country. Unlike the situation we are seeing now, where they tend to wake up because there's a change of government, we expect them to perform 360 at the same pace, other than seemingly to be performing according to the wishes and feelings of whoever is at State House. That is not healthy for this country. Then coming to the issue of public debt, we have noted that the President has acknowledged that public debt remains a big challenge that has negatively affected the national budget, as half of the national budget of Zambia goes towards debt servicing. Therefore, as ActionAid, we are calling on the new government to undertake vigorous public debt audits to establish the scale and nature of public debt. Also, the biggest challenge we've seen is that there's been secrecy around the Zambia-China debt, and we are hoping that there will be debt transparency, especially regarding the Zambia-Chinese loans, which remain opaque. We also expect the new government to commit to reforms and amend the public debt legal framework, such as the Loans and Guarantees Authorization Act, and other related legislations to improve Zambia's primary legislation. This will improve transparency and accountability. But most importantly, there is need for the new government to put in place a task committee that probably even just a debt endeavor to try and find possible solutions to this debt, because already we are seemingly having different views now of whether Zambia should get onto an IMF bail package or an IMF program or not. And it will be very interesting to see how we also accommodate divergent voices and views. For instance, Sean Temba has provided also a critical pathway on how government should consider to say they don't need the IMF program, largely because of the credibility that the new government has come with in the international community. They are therefore able to refinance the Eurobonds. But at the same time, we know that Zambia took about 3 to 4 Eurobonds, and there is need to reservice them. So these are some of the issues we are quite anxious to see how they'll be addressed, as they have a large effect on the correlation of the living conditions for the majority of Zambians. Coming to the issue of the rule of law and leadership and democracy, we also welcome the commitment of the President towards servant leadership in upholding the rule of law and respecting and safeguarding human rights and democratic principles, largely because we are coming from an administration where we saw a lot of extrajudicial killings, more especially perpetuated by the Zambia police. And even as we saw the changes that have happened and redeployment, we still wish to call for truth commissions so that some of these people who committed some of these crimes, such as extrajudicial killings, should be able to face the law at the end of the day, because we should not be seemingly to be massaging issues of human rights as well as corruption. So Zambians are really asking for justice at the end of the day. We should see equality before the law on how we deal with perpetrators of corruption as well as perpetrators of extrajudicial killings that we witnessed. And also, we are of the view that the new government needs to develop a governance and accountability reform process to address the multiple issues to successfully achieve a clean and effective government. And we also note the commitment to govern the country based on the rule of law is key, as it will allow every citizen to participate in the governance of the country effectively without fear of being victimized by political opponents. So we are coming from a situation where Zambians were gagged. We're dealing with with a brutal regime, and with that's what led even to the protest votes. Therefore, what we don't want to see is this whole issue of cadarization, because at the end of the day, we are all Zambians, and we should be allowed to support and have divergent views as well as support different political parties, because that's what democracy entails. So as Action Aid Zambia, our call is to ensure women and youth are among members of parliament that will be nominated to promote inclusivity of the marginalized groups in the governance of this country. And our constitution is very clear and elaborate in terms of the 8 nominations which the president, they need to look at issues of being differently able-bodied, being youth and being women. So you need to look at the representation of the marginalized groups who ultimately failed to make it into the mainstream political due to the gatekeepers and so many issues that surround that. So as Action Aid Zambia, we call for the new government to domesticate and ensure that treaties that are not only signed be ratified through the appropriate national legislation with the aim to promote human rights and liberty among all the Zambian people. Then there's also an issue to do with civic participation and respect for human rights. The fundamental principles that ensure respect for human rights need to be upheld all time. And we acknowledge the commitment, which was further emphasized by the President, that under his government, the UPND and its alliance members will ensure there's a clear separation of power among the 3 arms of government. So we are hoping not to see one arm of government being dominant, as in the previous party that has gone out, where we saw the executive being so strong, especially on the judiciary and on the legislature. We are hoping to see that we see a president who allows parliament to function, considering that he has got a very robust and experienced vice president who has been in parliament before, even at its highest level. So therefore that should give him a comfort zone and not to see him mingling much into the affairs of parliament. So that is our expectation. Also, as promoters of social justice, we welcome President Hichilema's commitment to the promotion of freedom of the press. This is the commitment to the promotion of citizens' democratic rights for citizens to freely express against social injustice and engagements on social accountability. So therefore, we are looking forward to see him being able to review and amend regressive laws such as the Public Order Act, the Cyber Security and Cyber Crimes Act. And also we are hoping to see enactment of the Access to Information law, as well as the NGO law. Then lastly, I think on issues to do with economic management, we recognize the commitment to restructuring the macroeconomic stability and promoting growth of the economy by specifically paying attention to lowering the fiscal deficit, reducing public debt, and restoring social and market confidence. The President also recognizes key specific sectors for growth and reducing poverty, such as agriculture, mining, energy, financial services, tourism, technology, health, and education, among others. So on the part of agriculture, we are hoping we will see an end to inconsistencies around agriculture policies, which have worked to disadvantage especially small-scale farmers. And in terms of mining, we are also hoping to see a stable mining taxation regime, but also mining that is not being done detrimental to the hosting communities. We hope them to also be able to enjoy their rights as hosting communities through mineral royalties, as well as issues to do with pollution of their land, water. We hope that this will be tackled, and we hope to see a strengthened Zambia Environmental Management Agency, and like a situation we're coming from, where we saw them even issuing impact assessment to allow for mining in game areas. So we are hoping most of these mining which were granted will be cancelled. So for us, really, those are our expectation from the government, more especially the agriculture. Production must be enhanced by adequate services through agriculture extension services and research in view of climate change. You cannot continue to look at agriculture just as a means for food, but agriculture should be seen as the #1 employer in this country. So we need to see diversification and seeing it to be running more as a business, where we need to see a lot of value addition to agriculture products.
Right.
Yeah.
2, 3 issues, and I would like it to be brief. That's a massive program, there that has to be undertaken by the president.
So whole systems change.
Yeah, and I was actually, coming, to that. You need men and women who are with you on the same page, who are capable, who are efficient, okay, who would respond to the needs of the Zambian people and not just a political, party. He's already appointed the Minister of Finance. Your thoughts on that? And all that can fall apart if he doesn't have a civil service that is reading from the same page. Your thoughts on that?
I agree. You see, at the end of the day, for this government to deliver, it will largely depend on the organization culture of the civil service. That is, and also for them to be able to deliver, they need a civil service which is also aligned to the vision and mission, that also understands what it is that they're able to deliver on. And we know that, for instance, we'll see a number of changes. Some of people will be coming for the first time into the public service, coming from different sectors to come and serve. So even the induction and orientation will be very key in terms of how they are inducted and brought onto those systems. On the appointment of the Minister of Finance, well, I believe he went on to appoint somebody whom he's comfortable with in terms of delivering the vision and mission of the party. Safer hands, somebody who has been with the party. We have always known Dr. Stumbeko Msokotwani as the substantive Minister of Finance for UPND. Even when we want to engage them on economic matters, it will be Dr. Stumbeko Msokotwani who will be given to you. I was privileged last year to moderate a session, a panel on Africa's growing debt, and he was one of the former finance ministers invited to that panel. It was him and Tendai Betty who were my panelists in South Africa. So if you have worked with the UPND to see how they have been handling issues to do with the economy, it was always Dr. Stumbeko Msokotwani, and they also have quite a lot of young economists around the UPND, and we are hoping that even those ones will be deployed to help him deliver on their vision and mission as a party. Then the other appointment we saw also is for a young presidential spokesperson, which is also very welcome, a former Copperbelt University graduate, and I think a student activist. Brilliant. So it also gives hope to the younger generation that they're able to take on the mantle, but they will need a lot of guidance and leadership. For the civil service, well, there are we are also hoping to see that he gets to restore the roles of permanent secretaries, because we know that that is a permanent role. Unlike what we saw with the previous government, where we saw a number of them serving, is it 2 years on average and so on. So it defeats the whole purpose of those roles. So you need people who fully understand, well-read, well-educated, and be able to deliver on the vision and mission of, we have the Vision 2030 as a country. And we also have the UPND manifesto, which I believe now will be part of the guiding policy framework moving forward. So we need people who are able to deliver on these things, but also who have the capacity, who have a track record of having performed where they are coming from. But also, as we give opportunities to the new, especially the young ones, we also need to give them a confidence and the benefit of doubt that they are also able to bring on board what they have learned in their universities. We saw Kaunda having that whole trust. When he came in, he used to have all these graduate programs and so on, which brought on the then technocrat of that time, and we are hoping that that cadre of technocrats is continued to be built, anchored on our institutions of learning.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned the word cadre. How does he deal with the other cadres?
Well,
the notorious ones.
Well, the political cadres, by and large, they have been the creation of political parties. PF created its cadres, UPND created its cadres, MMD created its cadres. However, at the end of the day, one thing we need to understand is that they are Zambians, and therefore they also have a say in and a stake in this country. And they also need to be accorded opportunities in terms of how they will be able to survive. So there is really need for a robust economic program that delivers and prides itself on entrepreneurship and being able to look at the private sector as the engine for growth. Right. And once the challenge we had with the PF is that the party became the private sector, and we don't want to go back to that, where you kill a genuine private sector, and for any private sector to survive, they have to be aligned to the party. We don't want to go back to such a situation. We need a private sector that is allowed to compete. Let government be a regulator. Let government restrict itself to playing a regulatory role. Government should not have business in business. Let the private sector take over the business. And also the issue of giving 20% to Zambian is one of the issues that a lot of private sector had issues with in this country. Can we see it moved up? Probably over a period of time, maybe it reaches 50, so that you allow the 50% to come from foreigners, largely due to issues of financing and others.
Absolutely. Perhaps, a very critical question, and again, very quickly, let me put it this way, which critical checks and balances institution would you like to see perform to the highest to ensure that this government is watched, critically, but at the same time assisted, to succeed?
Well, the critical institutions, I would say that civil society needs to continue playing their watchdog role and being to keep this government on its toes and providing the necessary checks and balances. I would also say that the government institutions, investigative wings, the anti-corruption, financial intelligence center, drug enforcement, the Zambia police, the judiciary, they need to work as one in terms of ensuring that they are safeguarding the public resources of this country, that they are utilized for the purpose and benefits of the Zambian people, as outlined in the various developmental frameworks, such as the national budget and all other spending agencies are spending accordingly to what is allowed within the thresholds and within the policy framework and the law. The challenge we tend to see is that institutions in Zambia tend to perform according to the feelings of who's in State House, which is not very good. Also, the Zambia Revenue Authority, no country has ever developed without tapping into its domestic resource mobilization. So we need to see that there's a fair share price of individuals, especially the wealth in this country, paying their fair share in terms of taxation. So can we look at that? And also taxation from the mining sector. We kept seeing inconsistencies in terms of some of the mining taxes, bills which were being given to mining entities. There was really no transparency around what would happen around it. It was being left to speculation. So can we see that cases are being concluded, being brought to their logical conclusion for the benefit of Zambians? The other key issue, which a lot of young Zambians are quite interested, is the whole reform to the NAPSA, which the UPND used as part of their campaign. A lot of young Zambians are quite anxious to access finance and begin developing in terms of those who are contributors. If you look at the current NAPSA in its current setup, it's a shame, really. There's no way you put in money in a pension fund and then it will be given to you until you have contributed up to a certain threshold, and even what you keep getting probably after you reach the threshold of accessing it is also again dictated for you. For me, it builds a whole slavery kind of model. So we cannot allow it in this age and era, really. So we need to really make sure that there's access to financing, because a lot of technocrats working Zambians, they want to also run businesses, but where do they get the financing? So you need to make a system that allows for everyone. Right. You might even see a lot of people probably leaving the civil service to go and run business because there's adequate access to financing. Absolutely. And also the youth badge, it's quite huge. So probably one of the things the new government might have to look at is also lowering the retirement age, probably bringing it back to 55.
Brilliant. Okay, very quickly. I know the budget has already been prepared, was prepared by PF. It will be announced, next month. Puts UPND in a very difficult situation because it's very difficult to tinker with it. Perhaps during the supplementary, budget. What would you like to expect in this budget? Are you expecting anything? I know we haven't seen it, but there've been submissions. But let me just put it this way: what would you like to see, which is critical in this budget? We'll be winding very shortly. I see my director worried about time. It's been very interesting. Yeah.
So one of the things that we are hoping to see in this budget as Action Aid is that increased funding towards social service sectors such as health, largely due to the COVID pandemic. So you look at Zambia has been hit by twin pandemics, as we would put it. You have poverty, high poverty levels on one hand, and then you have got the pandemic of COVID, which has also exacerbated vulnerabilities of the poor who are already vulnerable. So we need to see a situation where our health services and institutions are well funded so that they're able to deliver adequate health services for everyone. And we don't want to see the scandals we continued seeing in the Ministry of Health, where it's now propelled to benefit a few individuals at the expense of the entire country. We also hope to see a well-resourced Ministry of Agriculture. And when we say that, we don't want to see 60 or 70% of the budget going to the Farmer Input Support Program. Yes, it's a good program, but that program is a social safety net. If it can be moved to the Ministry of Community Development so that it sits there, then we see a robust Ministry of Agriculture budget that is able to support agribusinesses as well as small-scale farmers and farmer extension services in view of the climate change. Then the other one is also the Ministry of Education. We hope to see services improved in the Ministry of Education, looking at what the pandemics has brought on the education sector. We need to see schools that are well-resourced. If schools are being closed and being moved to using other technologies for learning purposes, they need to be well adequate resourced and being able to deliver that education. Because currently what we are seeing is that it has widened the gap between the have and have not. If you take your children to private schools, most likely they are learning. If your child goes to a school like in my home village, Nalolo, chances are that they are closed, that's it. But you expect them to come and interact with the same exam paper. So that is broadening the inequality base in the country. So we are hoping to see a budget that also reduces the inequality gap that is widening in our country.
On a lighter note, I mean, a lot of people from all sorts, including the people who really threw this president to the gutters, have congratulated them. That's fine. And then the others, like the man of the moment in NPF, Mr. Lusambo, is offered to work with the president and this administration.
Well, I think one of the things which saddened me is that we really lowered the leadership bar in Zambia, where you have people getting jobs on the basis of bootlicking. And at the expense of delivering development. And as we mature and as we grow as a country, those are the things which we should never allow to start with. And I believe that as much as he has offered his services to President Hakainde Hichilema, he strikes me to be more of a thought leader and somebody who prides himself in competence. So if your services will be based on bootlicking, I don't see how how the two can mix. It's like you're trying to mix water and oil, really.
One issue that raised the debate is to the issue of where the president stays, whether it's in State House or at his house. Your quick thoughts on that?
Well, for me, where the president stays doesn't really matter, but the issue is the office. Where would the office be located? Is it, if it's State House, then he has to work from State House because that's where all the state security and protocols are provided. If you go to most of these developed countries, even some of those presidents don't stay in the presidential palaces. They also, we can see them moving to their private homes. So we also need to, the same way each and every Zambian, you go to work, you knock off, you go back to your house. We need to normalize that. But at the end of the day, we need to realize that with the president, there are also issues of security which come in. So as much as he's comfortable in his house, but would there be enough security?
He's got to work at State House.
Yeah, so at some point it might have to border down to issues to do with security. But if he's comfortable staying in his own house, probably to also help save us costs as a country, because largely, like my friend Laura Miti says, these are the type of problems we are looking for to say President akana nyumba. I mean, next we should even hear that President akana salary, and like the problems of saying, no, the president is trying to grab land here, is trying to grab. So those are the kind of challenges and problems we don't need as a country at this moment.
I don't mind him staying at home, but as long as he can work at his office at State House, and I'm sure that's the situation as it stands. If the other option is He can leave his family at his house. He stays quasi wherever and goes back to his house and over the weekend. And I mean, that's those are my personal thoughts, really. But for us, as long as he can deliver and talk about delivering, what can make or break, this government?
For me, what can make or break this government largely will be the cabinet that he will pick. Because remember, that is the team he picks to deliver. So how he picks his team in terms of competences, capacities, ability to deliver, agility, being to be well informed and being approachable. Because the challenge we usually see in Zambia is that the moment people move to become ministers in these higher offices, the first thing you do is you change even your phone numbers. You don't want to receive feedback from anyone. That is what has really brought a lot of people down for. So can we provide spaces for being able to receive feedback, regardless of how difficult that feedback is? I think we need to learn to move to a point where let us learn to discuss difficult conversation in this country and start having them without looking at what is this person's tribe, what is your gender, what is your political affiliation. But let us always place Zambia as our common area of interest.
Brilliant. And that is where we're going to end. You say a number of important things. For me, I plucked out what I consider the most important. During the inauguration, he said, it is not about transferring power. It is about transferring leadership, because power belongs to the people. And we exhibited that on the 12th of August. How do we practice this practically as a people? Because it's our power now, okay? Look at that and submit that. His predecessor never interacted, with the country, especially through press conferences. So to translate what I've said and make it work, what should he put in place and what should be our role? I repeat again, it's not about transferring power. It's about transferring leadership, because power belongs to the people. So we have to play a role here. NALUCHA.
That is a very important statement, and for me, when I heard it when I was at the inauguration, and when I heard him say that, for me that was my key takeaway from the entire inauguration speech, plus the recognition of the youth vote. I felt happy as somebody who works with young people to say, finally, we have a leader who recognizes and believes in young people, and we are hoping to see how he walks the talk. But when it comes to the whole issue of power, for me, the most foremost thing he needs to do is decentralize. Decentralization moves power closer to the people. It brings in the participation of each and every citizen in the governance of this country. So if you look at the framework, we have a very progressive decentralization policy. But the challenge and weaknesses of successful government has been that we have spoken about decentralization as a lip service. So the money also has to move. Even when we're talking about decentralization, of course, there are certain things that can be decentralized, such as the national security, the army, and so on. But these other areas, let them be decentralized so that each of these provinces and districts began to determine their own affairs. The issues you find in Kanchivia won't be the issues you find in Shangombo. They will never be the issues you find in Lwangeni, in Lundazi, no in Chasefwa, no in Chama, no in Milengi. So how do you deal with those peculiarities? It's by allowing autonomy of those districts to be able to make decisions that are in the favor of and the context of the areas where they are. So that's why in that way we'll be able to be bringing power closer to the people and people having a say. For instance, when you look at the Planning and Budgeting Act, it has provided for citizens' participation through clusters. But what are those clusters? If you had to critically ask, what would you constitute a cluster? Would it be being a member of the elitist Economic Association of Zambia because you're an economist? Or will it be by virtue of your status, your education privileges, and so on, and your power of association? Or will it be because I'm a Zambian, I reside in this locality, they will provide a mechanism of coming to consult me in terms of what I should see in the budget? Because right now Zambia, I believe, is using an output-based kind of budget. So those are some of the areas that this government needs to take advantage of and get to operationalize the Decentralization Act and policy. It's there, very robust, but it has been packed. Like we are always being told, Zambia is very good at coming up with policies and plans, but never implemented. Yeah. So for me, the key issue is implementation. If we are going to transfer the power to the people, it's about implementation, but it's also the willingness of the president to reduce the executive powers. Currently, that is what is choking our democracy in this country. We need to find a president who will be willing to let go of some of the powers that the executive yields in this country.
Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle Frank,
for your thought-provoking, contributions. It's been a long one, but I did enjoy it. I think we tackled a number of, governance issues. The president has facilitated a wonderful environment for people to flourish. All you have to do is, and I'll finish very shortly, think big, perform big, and succeed big. The biggest one, like I keep on saying, do your very best, and God will do the rest. On behalf of my guest, NALUCHA ZIBA, Country Director for Action in Aid, an organization which strives in good governance and ensuring that the lives of our people get better and better. To the NGOs, do play your critical part because you're the closest to the people. To the politicians, the message is very clear. Nothing lasts forever. Two, the people have got the power. God bless you. Until next week, on Tuesday, on behalf of my guest, and indeed the crew here, Isaac, and the race, and the Executive Director, Pastor Chiluba, and Mrs. Chiluba, I'm Frank Matubila. Good night to you. God bless you.